All right, so we are here. This is the first episode of now season 3. And season 3, it's a little interesting because we've recorded a lot of episodes, over 140 at this point, and we only recently even started calling these seasons. But here we go. We're officially in season 3, starting off. And for season 3, we decided that we wanted to open with something a little bit special. For those of you who've been with us for a little while with this whole Made It in Music podcast, you might know that we started this whole podcast on, quote, season 0 with the Full Circle Music Show. This podcast used to have a different name. So if you go back into the archive and listen to some old episodes, you'll find that we called it the Full Circle Music Show back then. And if you flip all the way back to episode 1, you will discover that that very first episode was an interview with none other than the Seth Mosley, talking about the vision and the purpose and the whole idea for this show. And so that's what we're doing here today for the very first episode of season 3. We're going back to the basics, and we are going to revisit that first episode and just revisit a lot of those ideas and talk about, why are we even doing this? And before we get into the interview with Seth here, I want to mention that as we start season 3, we're always on new adventures and trying to find new ways to make this podcast as valuable as possible. And one of the really cool things that we've done that is very different from the beginning is this podcast is available on both audio and it is available on YouTube. And so if you're listening to this on audio, I would encourage you to check out the YouTube version of it so that you can actually see this whole conversation in person. That's just on our YouTube channel. You can search Full Circle Music right on YouTube. And if you want to hear the audio version, you can just search Made It in Music on your favorite podcast player. And you can always find everything you could ever want to know about both versions of this podcast at our website at madeitinmusic.com. And I'll share a little bit more about the website at the end of this. But for now, I want to go and get into this interview. You guys know who this is. This is Seth Mosley. He has been the host from the beginning of the Made It in Music show. He is amazing. He is the fearless leader of this company, and he has more Grammys and number ones and doves and all that kind of fun than we can count. So let's go ahead and get started. Seth, hi, how are you?
I am good. Thank you for that awesome introduction. This is really fun. You know why it's fun is because this morning as I was on my way in, I figured, what a better thing to do than literally for me to go back and listen to episode 1. And it was really, really an interesting exercise to go back and see kind of where we've come from. That was December 1st of 2015. We are over 4 years past that now.
When we're recording this, yeah.
As of the time of recording this. And to even listen back, we started out by calling it the Full Circle Music Show.
Because that was just the name of your company.
That was the name of the company. It's just call it the Full Circle Music Show. And we had a co-host, Chris Murphy. He's a great guy, friend of mine. He's kind of gone on to do his own thing. But at the time, I didn't know anything about starting a podcast. This was pre-Academy. This was pre-us venturing into publishing company, record label. We'll dive in a little more, in detail on those things. But it was an interesting mental rewind to think, wow, we've come a long way since recording that 2 studios ago. And it's kind of a mind trip. So I'm glad we're getting to revisit the why of what we do, because I always want to keep that at the forefront of our company, because I really do believe that it doesn't matter what you do. It really matters why you do it and the heart behind it. So we'll dive into that. We'll also dive into some of the things we've learned. We've learned a lot in the last 4 years. It's just even weird to think, for those listening or watching this is Logan Crockett. I didn't properly introduce him. You've been hearing him on the headers for season 2, but you'll definitely be hearing a lot more from him as he is an integral part of what we do at the Academy. But I'm excited to really dive in and just talk about what all we're working on.
Yeah, and honestly, for me, just doing this kind of interview is such a little bit of a full circle moment for me personally, because you mentioned how the first episode started 4 years ago. And now I am a huge part of the Academy. But back then, when you guys released the very first episode, I was just like anyone listening to this podcast. I was a listener. I was someone aspiring to get into the music industry on a professional level. And that's why I was so interested in this podcast and hearing all these interviews and what you guys were doing. And I remember I was, would just be like cleaning in my apartment or something like that, and would just have this podcast just playing episode after episode after episode in the background, just hearing story after story of these people who have just gone through so much to make it. And this podcast in and of itself was a huge inspiration for me to just push forward and try and get connected with Nashville and make things happen on my own musical journey in that regard. But now it's just really cool that, I was literally listening to those podcasts way back when. And here I am actually interviewing you. I know you well enough now that this feels almost normal. But compared, like imagining myself as back in 2016, the 2016 Logan, who was just listening to the podcast at the time, it's like this moment, what's happening right here, would have just totally blown my mind.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. And part of the reason why we started the podcast was we wanted to, big reason was I worked with a coach back then named Kyle Wilson, still a really good friend of mine, but he encouraged me as we had these ideas of, okay, I've had this success in music as a songwriter, as a producer, but I want to create a platform that's bigger than just the Seth Mosley Show. And that's why we started Full Circle Music, to make it about something that was bigger than just me. And one of the outreaches of that was the Academy. So his suggestion was, hey, you should start a podcast. And I didn't even really know why he suggested that. I know now that really starting a podcast is about building an audience.
You had been listening to some podcasts at that point, right?
I loved podcasts. Yeah, I've been into podcasts ever since they came out, pretty much. And what I love about it is it's getting to really dive in under the hood for people's stories, and then you can kind of reverse engineer apply it to your own situation. But it's really kind of a testimony to the power of it in terms of even just like attracting great people, people like yourself, who I didn't even know at the first, taping of the first podcast. So
yeah.
We can, we're getting very meta right now, but we can dive a little more in.
Yeah, absolutely. So just reflect a little bit more for us real quick. Just the fact that it's been 4 years. I'm sure to a certain degree you can probably vividly remember the very first podcast that you did because it was the first one you did. So does it feel like it's very like it was just almost yesterday kind of thing? Or I mean, at that point,
it was it was a blast from the past listening, because it really 4 years is a long time, but at the same time it's flown by.
Mm-hmm.
And I just even think back, we were literally 2 locations ago. We were in our house in Franklin, in our little upper room, which was kind of our studio in the back of the house. We had none of this awesome, video, audio, visual equipment. We were sitting at like a black folding table.
We've made a few upgrades. And really a big part of that is building our team to great people who can, produce this great quality content. But I just think I had no idea what I was getting into. It was just, this is an experiment. This is something that I want to try. I even just listened back to myself talking about the music industry as Chris was asking me questions of, at the time there was a lot of doom and gloom around, streaming was really becoming the thing. Music sales as we knew it were kind of on their way out. So I think a lot of people were freaking out about how is this actually going to play out long term. Since then, we're in a very different environment. The dust is settled. Streaming has been a great thing for the industry. It's not been as great for songwriters yet. It's hopefully going to, cross over that threshold in the not too distant future with the Music Modernization Act and everything. So being on the other side of that now, I think there's so many similarities and so many things that have not changed since then. I said in the interview back then that it all starts with a song, and that's more true now than ever. That's almost like a core belief of Full Circle.
Yeah, it all starts with a song, and I can't claim that that's a saying that I came up with. That's just Nashville. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's more true than ever, that people who write and know how to create consistent hit songs are the ones that are going to have staying power in the music business on the creative side. Now, whether you're a songwriter or not, you at least have to know how to attach yourself to people who are writing good songs, whether that's the artist, whether you're a music publisher, whether you're a manager, whether you're a front of house engineer who's aspiring to break into the industry and go tour. You have to know how to partner with people who create great songs, because that's the currency of what drives this entire business forward. So, I mean, I've learned a ton. At the time of, like I said, recording that, we didn't really have our academy. It was sort of an idea.
The podcast was really the first piece of the academy.
The podcast was the first piece of the academy. We didn't have a publishing company. We went through kind of an iteration of our own in-house record label since then, which we kind of put on pause. We can dive a little more into that here in a bit and some of the reasons for that. But man, so much has changed, yet so much hasn't. It's still about the song. And it was just so interesting. Blast from the past to go listen back to that.
Definitely. And so, anyone listening to this or watching this, I would encourage you to go back to that very first episode. Probably listen to this one first, but I think you'll find it really interesting if you listen to this full episode and then go back. We'll put a link both on YouTube and right in the audio description for wherever you would be listening to the podcast there.
Well, just even on a personal note too, like, this was a new thing for me. At the time, I had just worked with a speaking coach, because the year before that, the one story I like to share with people is, if you feel like you're stuck in life with anything, the best thing you can do is lean into the thing that you fear most. Just do what you fear most. And for me at the time, that was public speaking. Back in 2013, 2014, I had a mentor say that to me, do what you fear most. And I was like, well, I guess I should learn how to speak, and public speaking doesn't necessarily just mean being on a stage. It can mean what we're doing right now, just having conversations extemporaneously. Because before, like, even when I was in a band, I used to hide behind my guitar and my mic and on stage, and we had our set planned out every night. I knew exactly what I was going to say. It was, just wham, bam. But public speaking and having conversations like this is a very different thing. So that was one of the reasons why I started the podcast. And even just to listen back, I can hear it in my voice that I didn't know what I was doing. I think like, just even as a communicator, I mean, I still have so far to go. I'm not, going to be the next Tony Robbins or whatever, somebody who's a really good communicator. But even just the sound of my voice, the confidence, like just knowing how to conduct an interview and have a podcast. Like, it's just amazing. You can look back with anything you do, whether it's, songwriting or weightlifting or whatever you're aspiring to do. You can look back 4 years ago and see a lot of progress.
Everyone who's good at something used to not be good at that thing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
See, it'll be really interesting if you go back and listen to episode 1. You might very well notice exactly what Seth's talking about. You'll see for yourself or hear for yourself, how Seth maybe has changed himself and the way he conducts interviews and all that from 4 years later.
It's been a lot of learning.
So one thing that was asked on that very first episode that I want to revisit, and you've already touched on a little bit how Full Circle, the company that you started, has really changed a lot. But walk us back in time real quick to two things. To number one, what even is Full Circle Music? And then revisit why you decided to create Full Circle Music as a team instead of, quote, the Seth Mosley company or the Seth Mosley show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of hit on it, that at some point I figured out that the music industry is way more fun if you're doing it as a team sport. And I've kind of always had some element of collaboration on anything that I've done, whether it was back from, me starting a band. Obviously, you have your bandmates, you have your producer you're working with, you have your label. Even when I was producing records on my own, I was still working with other, engineers and mixers and people. So I just knew that for myself, I'm not the type of person who is going to be happy going into a hole in a cave in a studio like this and just sitting in there for 14 hours, coming out for light every now and then and not seeing any other humans. There's a lot of producers and music makers who are like that. And I just figured out for me early on that was not me. I also knew that, all of us kind of have a quote unquote shelf life in this industry. We have our years that we're hot. We have our years that we're not. And so I have I didn't know this about myself at the time, but I've discovered about myself, one of the things that I am is I'm an entrepreneur. I love, coming up with ideas, and then not only coming with the idea, but executing an idea and bringing it to life. I love the process of building things. I think it's an extension of me as a creator, as like a songwriter, because really we're starting with nothing and then coming out with a beautiful song, or hopefully a beautiful song at the end of the session. So I think I'm just a creator at heart, and the entrepreneur side of me is somebody who's not only a creator, but a creator who's willing to, put his money where his mouth is. And so there's a lot of risk that comes with being an entrepreneur. And that's where a lot of people stop, because they get fearful of what if this doesn't work. I think I've just always had that quality of like, let's just go forward. It's always been more ready, fire, aim for me, which I'm sure is frustrating for some of the people around me and has been for you as coming on. But it's really more about like just taking the next step, and then the next step, and the next step. And you're constantly going to be iterating and making tweaks and getting better. Almost more like the Silicon Valley mindset. And so that really, even if I didn't know fully why I started Full Circle Music at the time, I knew that was sort of the personal side. The big side for me is just having a company. You can have way more influence and legacy in the industry than if it was just me. I know now that there are songs out there impacting the world and changing people's lives that I had nothing to do with writing. Like, I obviously had to do with, finding the talent and helping kind of to fund and invest in that. But that was a really cool thing. The first time I heard on the radio one of the songs that we had funded as,
through our publishing company,
or label at the time, just to hear that and know that I didn't write it, but that song is having an impact on somebody. So that was really cool. And that's something that's truly scalable. Like it's more than just about me. It's really just about how many awesome, talented people can we attract to work with us. And so I want to build something that has longevity, but really everything at the end of the day, I'm a believer. I'm a Jesus follower, and everything at the end of the day comes back to that for me. I think I don't necessarily want to put the label on our company as we are a Christian company. We're a company that's founded by Christians with Christian principles, Christian morals. Everything we do, we want to make sure that it opens up a conversation to, in some way, expose people to the truth that we believe in and to Jesus. So it's really a big platform for influence to hopefully open up that conversation and help impact the world for Christ in that way. So that was kind of the big, much longer answer than you had asked for, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So that's the real big driving force behind why you started this and what it's kind of evolving into and what propels us to move forward. In the simplest way possible, one thing that is a little bit tricky with our company is we do things differently than a lot of other music companies. We like to call ourselves a very modern music company. But sometimes if you literally take someone off the street, like they understand on a general level, like, hey, what's a record label? What's a publishing company? Things like that. But when you say, hey, we're Full Circle Music, a lot of people, I think, know different facets of Full Circle Music and certain things that we do. But I think it's a lot of people out there don't necessarily have a good grasp on like the whole picture of really what is Full Circle Music. So in a very simple way, like if I'm literally just coming right off the street and just asking, hey, Seth Mosley, do you have this company Full Circle Music? What exactly is all that about? Like how do you answer that?
Yeah. Well, outside me as a songwriter and music producer, it's really three things. It's a production company. So if you come over to our studios at any given point, we're probably producing a record for somebody. It's a production machine that's running year round. We produce music in Christian and country and some film and TV alternative spaces as well. So the production house is kind of part one. Part two is a publishing company. So the publishing company is and for people who are new to the industry, and I'll just, no listener left behind, publishing company is really just a company that invests in songwriters that are the ones writing the songs every day that then get cut by other artists. So we started a publishing company around a guy named Matt Hammett. He had a band called Sanctus Real, had really kind of just bugged me to start it over and over and over again. And so we eventually did, and hired a girl named Stacy Wilbur, who you guys, if you are, listen to our stuff, you know who she is. So she's our VP of publishing, and she runs that. I do want to rewind to our VP of production, who runs our production, is X O'Connor. He is sort of the man behind the curtain, directing all of this content.
He's literally behind the curtain right now.
Quite literally. So you guys know X, amazing Grammy-winning producer. And then so production, publishing, and then the third part, and really what this whole thing is an outreach of. This podcast is the Full Circle Music Academy. Mm-hmm. And so the Academy is a platform that provides resources, products, services, information to hopefully help people avoid the pains of breaking into the music business and ultimately trying to go full-time in it. So that's, we help songwriters through free products, paid products. We help artists. We help really, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of make a career in music. So we kind of help break down, okay, well, what are the baby steps? Like if we're thinking about it in terms of kind of Dave Ramsey model, like he has his debt snowball baby steps. Let's reverse engineer that and think, okay, what are the baby steps that it takes to make a career and to actually go full-time in music? That's what we're trying to provide. So the Academy is about providing success stories. And at the end of the day, a lot of the people that we've met through the Academy have then gone on to do stuff at a big level and, produce stuff for labels and publishing companies and have their songs cut. So those are really the big three things. Yeah. It's production, publishing, Academy, and then there's me. There's me as a songwriter. So
you're still writing hits every day and making magical things happen.
I'm still, funny enough, like even after starting all this, last year we kind of had a little bit of a focusing year, I would call it. Mm-hmm. And I probably ended up writing more last year than I had like in my whole career. So it kind of vacillates when we're producing a record, but like I'm writing, trying to stay in the creative trenches pretty daily in co-writes with artists.
So with this show, this podcast in particular, this is one piece of the Full Circle Music Academy. The Full Circle Music Academy has lots of different resources across all kinds of different price points. This podcast obviously being
and free too. Yeah.
And so this is one piece of something that we do through the Academy. And so you've talked about the Academy a bit, but let's dive a little bit more specifically into this podcast. And you've talked a little bit about why you wanted to start it as far as doing something that you fear most, and that being public speaking. But what are kind of some things that you were hoping that the podcast might turn into, and maybe it has or maybe it hasn't? And then what are some of the big advantages that have come from it?
I would say the biggest surprise for me was it's actually become a great relationship builder. I've been able to meet people that I wanted to meet in the music industry. One of the guys that I've looked up to forever in the country space is Shane McAnally, and I was able to offer him a spot on our platform, and it's adding value to what he's doing. Mm-hmm. It drives people towards Smack and all of their stuff. So it's really like I always start in terms of, okay, what's a way we can serve any person in any situation? The podcast really is that in the embodiment. And so when we're able to bring in, a Chris Lacey or just trying to think, Noreen, who's going to be on this season, or Lizzie Hale last season. It's really all about like propping up their platform, but in turn of like adding value to them, it starts to build a relationship. So now we kind of know each other. There's that. So I would say that's probably been the biggest thing that I didn't necessarily expect, and what definitely wasn't the reason for starting it. The thing that I will say, just learning wise, it's a long, slow build, just like anything. nowadays, because people have access to make content on their iPhone and for free, there's so much of it out there. So breaking through, and that's the thing that you're going to find if you're breaking in the music industry, is getting your content out there and making it go viral is really hard, but it really is about consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And if you commit yourself to saying, you know what, we're going to put out an episode once a week or once every couple of weeks or whatever it is, you're held accountable to that. But that's what it really takes to kind of grow a thing. Because, we've seen that, like, it's been a slow build ever since the beginning. And, we're now getting featured in, FeedSpot, like the top 3 music industry podcasts, but it's, 4 years later. It's not an overnight thing. YouTube has been a huge thing. We didn't start on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
The power of YouTube as a search engine is huge. The video component, I think, is huge. I think it's almost a different, like if you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably a different viewer than somebody who, typically listens to podcasts, or maybe you might not be, but it's kind of almost a different audience. So it just has opened up a lot more, awareness. So I would say those are the biggest learning things. But just being consistent, no matter what it is that you're doing, whether it's writing songs or starting a podcast.
And because it can be tough to be consistent. There have been times, I don't know that we've ever legitimately considered, quote, quitting the podcast. But there have definitely been times where I remember when I first came on that there were some episodes that we did where it was like we had to get an episode up on a Tuesday and it was like a Monday afternoon and it was like, okay, what do we do now for this week?
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of, I think even just how we've handled the podcast.
Yeah, the production schedule.
Has just really changed a lot. But all that to say is, like, on a lot of levels, doing exactly what you're talking about, being consistent and not giving up, but just pushing through and continuing to come out with more and more content in the same way. I think it can sound, well, what you just said almost sounds really easy in theory, but I want the listeners to know that in practice, not only will it be likely difficult for you, worth it, but difficult, but it's also been very difficult for us. Just because we talk about, keep coming out with it doesn't mean that even on our end, it's that simple.
Yeah, the consistency thing, it says easy and does hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just a discipline like anything else. And setting yourself up to win. The way that we produce it now is so different than we used to. It's very concentrated effort in a very short amount of time, to where we're not, oh crap, we got to get an episode up tomorrow. We're pre-booking,
planning in advance,
pre-planning. Yeah.
Wonderful things. So do you have any particularly favorite memories or moments from the show over these last 4 years?
I guess I think in terms of quotes,
we've gotten some good ones.
Got some really good quotes. I think, one of the guys in our industry that I had looked up to really since I came here, who's in the Christian space, is Jason Ingram. And, the thing that stuck with me, and I still quote it to people, is your calendar will tell me if you're a songwriter, or sub in whatever that fill in the blank is. Your calendar will tell me if you're an artist. Your calendar will tell me if you're a guitar player.
Your calendar will tell me what's important to you.
Exactly. So I thought that was really huge. I liked, Sam Tenez is a great friend. At the time of recording this, I think it's public knowledge. He's since then. This is the other fun thing about the podcast is I if we did like a "Where Are They Now" issue, that would actually be really cool.
Oh, that's a good idea.
But like guys like Sam, who, he had a lot going on in the sync world at the time of his podcast, but he's actually just now signing a mainstream record deal with Warner LA for like just a huge pop push on what he's doing. And he never anticipated that, never really planned that, just happened. And again, it's been consistency for him, but he said, don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 30. And
we have used that one a lot.
Yeah, I use that. Sam, if you're listening, I quote you on that all the time. I just think that's such a good encouragement to people that if you're watching this and you feel like you're discouraged and at a place where you want to quit and give up, and you're seeing like, okay, well, I'm looking up to this person there. They're all the way there. How do they get there? You can't compare where you're at if you're just in the beginning. Like it's an iterative process. And it's that whole quote. If you see a man on a mountain, you can be pretty sure he didn't fall there. It's a long climb. So I loved that conversation with Sam. Seeing, Casey Brown we had on really early on. This was before he had his first country number ones. He's had 3 since then. Just getting to hear about the conversation with him about collaboration. I loved from this last season getting to sit down with Stephanie Wright, who runs A&R over at Universal, just to hear about her process of signing artists and what does it look like inside a major label machine. Talking about how she found and met Casey Musgraves, who's one of my favorite artists.
So as much as our listeners hopefully get out of this, you've learned a lot from this podcast.
I get so much value in every one of these conversations. Like if we didn't get anything else other than that, it would be so worth it to me. And the last one that I'll hit on is probably rewinding. I think this was either episode 2 or 3. The story of Tom Douglas, who's a guy that I've been able to write with since then. He didn't get his first cut or his first success until after he was I think it was 40 years old or something like that.
Wow.
He had kind of gone through 2 iterations of moving to Nashville, moving away, getting back into real estate, moving back to Nashville, moving away. And so for me, that was just a great reminder of no matter where you're at in your path, it happens at different times for everybody. There's no one. I mean, there are things you want to make sure that you're doing, and that's sort of what we're working on with the Academy, is to try and boil down. Okay, we can't 100% guarantee anybody that they'll have a career in music, but we can 100% guarantee that if you're not doing certain things, you're going to be a whole lot further behind than most of the other people will be. So,
absolutely.
So that was just an encouragement from Tom's end of things, and I would just encourage people to go back and listen if they haven't had a chance to.
I'll make sure that we have links to those episodes that you mentioned below, the video or the audio, so that way you can easily access those. We have a few minutes left, and one thing that I really do want to hit on, you've mentioned how much that you've even recently discovered that you are really an entrepreneur. And in most cases, almost anyone who's not an employee in the music industry, meaning pretty much every songwriter, artist, producer, in most cases, they're also entrepreneurs, just sometimes by necessity, just because if you're not being employed by someone else, then that means you're employing yourself, which kind of automatically makes you an entrepreneur. But you've obviously taken it to another level where you do have this whole company, and you're not only, you just mentioned that in this past year, you've been writing more songs in this past year compared to other years. But at the same time, you're also literally a CEO.
Yeah.
You are doing all of this creative work, but you're also in charge of managing other employees. You're in charge of making sure that they, have a paycheck, which is a responsibility in and of itself. And you're responsible for making sure that this company, at the end of the day, we're obviously all here to support and help, but the weight of the responsibility is ultimately on your shoulders to make sure that this company is growing and not becoming stagnant or falling behind.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I really want to talk about is just some lessons related to that as just being a CEO. And one particular quote that I can think of that just happened recently, you were writing with someone, and that writer just commented very briefly, wow, Seth, he's really kind of just on time for things. Like, he's making sure that he's, I guess this word can have negative connotation to it, but like a stickler for making sure that things are happening on time. And they said that from the context that you're a little bit different from a lot of writers that they normally work with, but you're naturally a very different person because you are a CEO at the same time as being a writer and producer. So talk a little bit about some of the challenges there, some of the things that you've learned through this 4-year journey of really developing this team. Because way back in episode 1, you only had 2 other people on staff of full-time. It was you as the company owner, and then it was X O'Connor and Jericho Scroggins. Yeah. And now the company is much bigger than that. So so just walk us through some of the thought process and some of the lessons that you've learned along the journey.
Well, it's a very different thing to learn how to run a business than it is to learn how to operate to operate in a technical skill. Technical skill being like songwriting or playing guitar or running a mixing board or whatever it is. to learn how to run a business based off of those things is a very different thing. And that's what I've kind of had to learn the hard way in some ways. You know, it involves learning how to understand balance sheets and P&Ls, like just the basic financial stuff. It involves learning how to do forecasting and budgeting and, you know, making hard decisions from time to time. And it involves all of that stuff. It involves hiring. There's some HR to it. And it's a hard thing, but it's really rewarding at the same time to see what it is that we're building, that if it were only me, I would only be able to be outputting a fraction of what we're doing as a whole, you know? Mm-hmm. So I would just say, you know, to anybody who's interested in getting into music, yes, you do have to think very entrepreneurially, but you don't have to go start a giant company either. You know, it's a very different thing. And I would say from day one too, if I hadn't had the success I had as a songwriter that was really funding a lot of it in the beginning, I would have not been able to do it in the first place. So I think for me, it's getting to a place where it's actually becoming fun now. It's not that it wasn't fun before, but it's like you kind of have your years of going to school and like learning things, just trial by fire. And I think for 2020, we're heading into it strong. We've got some good mission. We've got some good vision. We actually went through a whole exercise last year where we created what we call our vivid vision. And that was a huge thing kind of that united our company, but also just put us on a path of just having clarity. Because when you're putting a team together, if you sort of have this vague idea of what you're trying to build, then there's no way they know. And so the exercise of getting really clear on that and doing soul searching and praying over it and, you know, working with my wife on that, we created our whole vivid vision document. And it's, you know, where's Full Circle Music 3 years into the future? And then to learn how to execute on that, that's another skill entirely too. Yeah. So we had to put together a weekly business rhythm. We're still refining it and tweaking it, but that's something that we're doing. It's a system called 4DX, the 4 Disciplines of Execution. A lot of this stuff is getting into the business weeds, and but if you want to learn how to run a company, those are all skills that you have to understand. But I enjoy it because I always love the feeling of growing and learning. So I've invested heavily in myself. I hired a coach that, you know, I pay pretty handsomely, but he's worth every penny of it too, because he's built something, you know, way bigger than what I have. And I want to learn, okay, how did he do that? So that'd be my other encouragement is if you want to grow, you have to be willing to invest in yourself, whether that's time or whether that's money. There's really no other way around that.
You're not just going to magically become everything you need to become on your own.
It's really about personal development.
Okay, Seth, question for you. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I've never been more ready in my entire life.
Lightning round.
This is the part of the show where we ask 5 rapid-fire questions, and you have to answer them very quickly without thinking very much. So, here we go. Question number 1. What is the most unexpected artist that you have ever worked with?
Unexpected. I'll go with the first label record I produced when I moved to Nashville, which was Newsboys, because it was my first CD I got when I was a kid in 1995.
Nice. What was your or still is your favorite Me in Motion song? For those of you who don't know, Seth used to be in a band called Me in Motion. Could also be your daughter's favorite song.
I'm going to go with my daughter's because my wife has introduced her to us. And her favorite is probably, I think there's one called Leaving Here Someday that she really likes. So
nice.
She loves
we will link to that below so that all of you can hear Leaving Here Someday. All right. Another podcast that you would recommend for musicians.
Rick Barker, Music Industry Blueprint.
Sweet. Your favorite ice cream topping?
Is a cookie dough a topping or is that a mix-in?
It can be both.
We'll go with cookie dough.
Cool. What is the most dangerous or risky thing you've ever done?
decided not to go to college and pursue a career in music.
Oh, that was a risk, and it panned out.
It worked.
Well, very good. Well, Seth, this has been really awesome. A lot of fun for me to get to have this conversation with you. Like I said, a real full circle moment personally. But we're really close to being out of time. So I just want to go ahead and close out and feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. But I want to stress, so again, this is the first episode of season 3. We have a long, exciting season ahead of us. We can't wait for you guys to get to hear the other guests and announcements that we have coming up in 2020. So if you want to stay up to date on all things Made It in Music podcast, I do want to stress that we have everything in a single, easy, wonderful online little portal called a website. And you can go to our Made It in Music website at madeitinmusic.com. And right there, you can get access to every single episode that we've ever released, including all the ones that we talked about on this episode and all of our episodes from the archives in the past, including going all the way back to episode 1, the very first interview that you did for this show. So you can find everything there. You can find both the audio and the video versions. But again, if you've been primarily listening to this in an audio format, I would definitely encourage you to check out the YouTube version of things. It can be really interesting to see actually in person, like how a lot of this operates. Like if you're just listening to the audio, you have no idea that there's this giant console behind us, and it looks pretty cool, so you should check it out. And vice versa, if you're watching this on YouTube, then make sure that you go check out the audio version, because sometimes you might be driving in a car, and it's a really bad idea to watch videos when you're driving in a car, but it's a great idea to check out the Made It in Music podcast while you're in a car. So check out both versions. And then on our website, you can always find our deep dives. Now, our deep dives are where we go after an interview, kind of after we close down the cameras, we turn them back on real fast, because normally we get one last little tip or idea from a guest. Normally it's between 3 to 6 minutes, where we just go a little bit deeper on a subject that maybe didn't make as much sense to really dive into during the interview. So it's kind of bonus content, if you will, but a lot of people really enjoy those. And so we make those available to you for free. Those, again, are at madeitinmusic.com. And Seth and I are about to get into a little deep dive here, where we are going to talk a little bit more about the idea of a vivid vision and how you can come up with one for yourself. And we're going to share a little bit more about ours. So make sure that you check out the deep dive, again, at madeitinmusic.com if you want to see what that's all about. And that's really all that I have for you right now. So hopefully you have enjoyed this episode. It has been really fun, Seth. Thank you for having me be a part of this ride.
Yeah, it's so fun. And one thing I'll add on the deep dive, just because it is really exciting. We put a lot of work into it, this vivid vision. If you guys want to see what our vivid vision is, we're going to throw that in there.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have access to the whole, you'll get to see it.
You'll get to see where our company is moving to, where we're trying to get to.
Exactly. And maybe it'll inspire you to create your own version of it for whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're building.
Absolutely. So we hope we'll see a lot of you on the deep dive, and we hope that we'll see the rest of you for episode 2 coming soon.
That's right. Thanks, Logan.
All right. Thank you.
What's up? Thank you for watching the Made It in Music podcast season 3. If you want to check out any of the other episodes from season 3, click up here. And we talk in the show about these really cool deep dives with all this extra bonus content. And if you want access to all of those, click here.